All right, so we are live.
We're here.
It's Nancy and Dawn from Evident Inc. And we're going to talk today about what makes a great story, right?
Yes.
So how's everything in your life before we get rolling?
I think pretty much the same as it is in everybody's life. We are finally under a you have to stay home order, so we are staying home.
That's in Texas, yeah?
Yes.
Here in Maryland, we don't actually have that yet. It's, I guess, a strong suggestion, but we haven't gotten the shelter in place order.
Here they're doing it by county.
Okay.
And so they've come out and said they're not going to do, or they have no plans to do an entire statewide shutdown, but each county. And so it was like a domino effect. One county started and then just all of us all just kind of followed. So
got it. Yeah, we're supposed to stay home like everyone else, limit our excursions. And then they just announced yesterday that the kids are not going back to school now until April 24th, which is a little frustrating because I would rather really that they just go ahead and make a decision instead of postponing it. So it is what it is. My two boys are both they've actually asked to go back to school, which is kind of an indication of how a week home with mom has gone.
Yes. Yep, I understand that completely.
Yeah. So kind of funny story. I think a lot of people know, I don't know that the Evident Inc. audience necessarily does, but we're in the process of moving across the country. You know that. And so my husband has already gone, and now it's up to me to sell the house. And the idea was to let the kids finish school, and then I was going to go. Hopefully the house would have sold in that time. But selling a house in this craziness is a whole other thing. So I had
oh yeah, I can imagine.
Nobody has come to look, but my realtor assured me that it's just because his fancy photographer hadn't been here yet. So this morning, the fancy photog came to take all the pictures, but he got here at 8 a.m., which I knew. So at 6 o'clock, I'm like running around the house, scrubbing things, taking things off the counters and sticking them in the oven, like putting things anywhere I could put them away. And I like roll my kids out of bed. And now that he's gone and all the pictures have been taken, they're like, Mom, where's my insert thing here? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't remember where I put it.
I stuffed it someplace. It'll show up when we pack. It'll be fine.
I found my little guy's shoes inside of a cabinet next to the front door. And he was like, why? I was like, I don't know.
Had to be out of sight. You don't understand.
Yeah. Well, so should we talk about what makes a great story?
Yes, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that. Nancy's moving extravaganza does not make a great story.
Well, no, but you just told a great story. You had great characters. You had the journey. You had the twist of the shoes being in the cabinet. You just completely followed what we talked about.
I'm a natural.
Yes, obviously, clearly. So I thought it was interesting when we were first discussing doing this topic that we have a little bit of different ideas of what makes a great story. That your stories, you tend to lean towards more of the characters.
Yeah.
I tend to lean more towards the plot.
Well, and I guess that just sort of goes to show that different readers are looking for different things too. So, and that's also a good example of why an editor is a relationship, because if your editor is very plot driven, but you're a character focused writer, that might not work out as well. Or it could, just depends.
Or they can help you get your plot moving and get your characters. If your characters spend a lot of time in their heads, sometimes they need to be doing stuff while they're in their heads. So
that's true too. They can give you kind of the counterpoint to your strength. That makes sense to me. Well, so what are some of the things that make a great story? If we just had to rattle off a couple, and then we'll give some examples.
Well, we talked about the characters. Characters, even though I am a plot-driven reader, I want a good journey. You still got to have good characters, because it's really hard to go on a good journey with characters you hate.
Right. So what makes a good character? Somebody that you want to spend time with?
Yes. We talk about the fact, and people always are worried about, well, is my character likable? Your character doesn't have to be likable.
Right.
They have to be relatable.
Right.
And that's a whole other discussion that we'll have sometime. But it's fine if I don't like your character, but I have to be interested in them enough to stay with them, even though I don't like them.
And you have to know enough about them to understand why they're doing the things that they do.
Yes, they have to have some kind of reasonable motivation that I understand.
Right.
Or, you know, when I like watching true crime stuff, and my son has a saying that he likes to throw out in there every now and then of, you know, cool motive, still murder. And so it's okay if they're doing bad things, but you want to still be able to relate to, okay, I wouldn't necessarily do that, but I can see how you got there. So I think that's very important.
Well, and we do a lot of romance, and so there's not often a true antagonist, but when there is an antagonist, I think the thing that I run into as an editor a lot is that they're very two-dimensional. They're just bad. They're just the bad guy, and they do all the bad things. But I always end up asking, okay, but why? Why are they doing this? And the thing that you have to remember about the antagonist is that they think they're the good guy, right? Mm-hmm. Usually. I mean, I guess there's probably some examples of antagonists that knew they were the bad guy. But even Voldemort has a reason for what he's doing.
Right. Yes. Right? Well, and when you get into the romance characters, one of the things I'm always big on is the best friend factor. Mm-hmm. That antagonist has a best friend normally. It's very rare that somebody lives in a vacuum, that they believe their side of the story. That they're like, you know what? You're right. He shouldn't be with her. He should totally be with you.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense. Because the hero usually has somebody that they bounce their big ideas off of too. So it just helps to kind of build the character's belief in their own actions.
Right. And that's not saying you have to have that character show up, that the antagonist has to have a POV. It's not anything like that. But they have to have a motive that's believable enough that you're not just like, okay, nobody would do this.
Right. So believability is part of great characters. What else do we think? Like a great journey, I think, makes a great story.
Yes. And I think some people, plot, story, journey, all that, you're reading because you want some kind of experience.
Something has to happen, right?
And something has to happen. Now, there are certain genres where less things happen than others. My first love is mysteries, thrillers, and suspense. So something's always happening.
Yeah.
But that whatever's happening, one, there needs to be a reason for it. You need to be able to identify why they're going to do this. And then it has to be a journey worth taking.
Right.
And even in romance, you have to have the journey worth taking. The guy or the girl or whoever they're going after has to be worth it in the reader's eyes. You don't want your reader looking at it and being like, oh, you could do so much better. Why are you chasing him?
Right. And that kind of wraps back into the character thing. Sometimes there'll be a hero, and especially in romance, and especially lately with the bully trends and the alpha male trend, there's been a lot of heroes that are not very heroic, heroes that really are just complete jerks, where you have to ask the writer, okay, like he can be an alpha, but there's got to be something redeemable, like something that makes her really be able to love him. Because if he's just going to boss her around all day, then that's not love.
Right. Yes. You've got to be able to see what the character sees in that person.
Right. It doesn't have to be what the reader would want in a hero, but it has to be the right fit for the heroine, right?
Yes, definitely.
So what else?
And then after the journey, my big thing, again, because thriller suspense, is a twist.
Right.
There needs to be a twist. Or if there's not going to be a twist, because we do love romance, there's the comfort factor. Well, talk about the twist first. Twist is, I didn't see that coming.
Right.
And I love problem solving. And so when I read the book, I am looking for clues. I am looking for something to happen. And I wish I could remember who it was, but one of the workshops I was at one time, the presenter pointed out that the reader usually wants to know the answer to the problem about a chapter before the protagonist figures it out.
So they can feel all smart and
you can feel a little like that. Now, with the twist, what makes a great story is that the author doesn't cheat. You can't randomly have ninjas dropping out of the sky.
Oh, it has to be something that would actually happen in this.
It has, well, and you don't want to have a character just show up out of nowhere. That it's like
on the soap operas when they come back from the dead.
Oh, it was
Stefano the whole time.
No, it's his evil twin. No one has ever heard of.
Right.
There's a popular book, which I will not name, but there's a popular book that it's aliens at the end. There's been no mention of aliens. And I had two friends who were reading this book that were texting me like, I'm about to throw this thing across the room. Where the hell did the aliens come from? And so it
was a good solution for the author.
Yes, it's because the author was sitting around at happy hour with her writer friends going, I don't know how to fix this. And somebody went, aliens. And they went from there. So the author can't cheat. You got to give the readers a reason to know, not necessarily know exactly what's coming, because there's a couple of really great books that have amazing, did not see that at all coming twist.
Yeah.
That there has to be something that it's not just dropping out of the sky.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so if it's a twist in suspense and thrillers, you said something about the comfort moment in romance, but I would say it's almost the grand gesture in romance.
Yes.
Is that the same as the comfort moment?
When I say the comfort moment, it's the comfort for the reader of the,
okay. Yeah. Like, oh, it's all going to be okay.
It's that content sigh that you get at the end of a rom-com.
Yeah.
And because when we pick up a romance, you pick up a romance because you know this couple's going to end up together.
Because that's the promise that a romance makes to you.
Yes. And you want to know, how did they get there? It's the same thing when you're sitting around and you meet somebody new and you're like, oh, so how did you meet your husband or your boyfriend or your whatever?
Right.
You want that moment. And romance readers get furious when that moment isn't there.
Oh, for sure. Anytime someone writes a duet, they get super mad. Well, it's coming, but it's coming in book 2.
Yes. And there is a certain someone who I do not consider a romance writer who has a tendency to kill people off. And it's like, no, I did not go through all of this for them to die.
Yeah, that's not usually the way that a romance ends. So that's the promise, right, of the genre. For romance, it's a happy for now or happily ever after. For thrillers, is it that there will be a twist that you don't see coming? Is that the promise?
Usually there's always the promise of a twist. And usually it's the promise that the bad guy's not going to win.
That makes sense. Okay.
That you're going to, there's a series, and I don't even remember the name of it. My mom was a huge fan of it, that after like 15 books, you're reading, you think this protagonist who has gone through all of these books, always defeating the bad guy, the protagonist gets shot on the last page of the last chapter, and it ends with everything went dark. And that is the last.
That's the last book?
That was the last book that was put out as of 2015.
Wow.
And now I haven't checked on that since then, so that series may have changed, but that infuriated a lot of people.
Yeah, that's like burning the house down when you walk away.
Yes. And so the promise is usually the bad guy's going to lose, the hero's going to succeed in some manner. It may not look, as you said, it may not be exactly what the reader wants to happen, but it's going to happen in some manner.
Right. And so I would say with literary fiction, if there were to be a promise of the genre, it might be that you end up thinking about something differently than you did before or see something in a new way.
I read very little literary fiction. I will admit that. But I think that is their goal, is just to inspire thought.
Yeah. I actually read a lot, but I am having a hard time coming up with a unifying premise, because literary fiction is kind of a wild and untamed beast that can be whatever you want it to be.
Well, and that might be part of their thing, is that you don't know what you're getting set up for. You don't know what you're going in. One of the other factors that we mentioned about what makes a good story is that it lingers with you.
That
and so even after you're done with the book, you're still thinking about the story, or you're still thinking about the characters. And that kind of goes with the literary fiction, because a lot of the thought-provokingness that they try to instill, you still think about it a little bit later. But for our authors, you want that lingering. You want them to still be thinking about it, because if they're thinking about it, they will talk about it.
Right. Well, and that's kind of the holy grail. You can't plan that. I mean, you can try,
right,
but you're just lucky if you have a book that really resonates with one of your readers and they go talk about it. But I think it kind of feeds what we were going to talk about a little bit in a couple minutes here, naming some of our favorite books. And when you said that a second ago, it made me think like, okay, yeah, because that's how you decide you have a favorite book, because there's something about a story that sticks with you even through years, to where like a couple of the ones I'm going to talk about, I haven't read them in a long time. And if you really asked me, like, tell me what the story's about, I'd have a hard time. I just remember that I loved that book for a certain reason that I can probably identify, but I couldn't relate the whole story back to you. So that's the lingering.
Yes. So I think those are our great story factors.
But different. Sorry.
I'm just going to take a drink. You just keep talking. It's fine.
Sometimes I wish my brain did not do the things it does.
I'll make a different word for that. It's the memorableness. Let's go with memorableness.
Lingering. Okay, we should move on.
Okay, yes, move on. So first of all, we are going to talk about some of our favorite books. But when we discussed doing this topic, we specifically said we're not going to talk about romance books. Do we want to talk about why?
No, just kidding. We don't hate them. We love them. But the reason we didn't want to talk about romance books is because we do, Evident Inc. primarily works in romance, not necessarily to the exclusion of other genres. That's just sort of how it's worked out. So to name certain romance books would be a disservice to some of our clients, because it wouldn't be nice. And they're all, if we work on them too, we're a little biased. So there's too many books that we've touched to be able to name favorites in an unbiased way.
Well, and we're both very much in this world, and we know a lot of these authors personally, and that would be like asking us to name our favorite child, basically. So
yeah. So we won't do that. So the books that we've chosen to share as favorites and use as examples fall outside of romance today.
Yes.
Do you want to share one first?
I was going to have you share yours first, actually.
Oh, okay. I can do that.
Yeah.
Do you want to take turns, or should I give you all three of mine?
I think it'd be interesting for you to give all of yours, and then I'll give all of mine.
Okay. So my first one that I was trying to figure out what it is because there's a couple of books that always sit in the front of my mind. If someone says, I need a book recommendation, these are the ones I always recommend. And so going backwards to try to think about why that's true was a worthwhile exercise. So the first one that I always recommend is called The Art of Racing in the Rain, and it's by a man named Garth Stein. Have you read that book?
No, I've seen the previews for the movie and figured I would end up sobbing, so I didn't go for it.
I forgot that they just made it into a movie, and I think this is not the time in my life for me to watch that movie either, because I don't need to cry right now or want to. I have enough reasons on my own. But the book stuck with me, I guess, for a couple of reasons. One, it's a really good family story, and I've always been really invested in like family sagas and the dynamics of what goes on in a family. But more importantly, it is narrated by a dog. And
that's so cool.
I think that can make people go like, oh, that sounds really stupid. And so you have to say that with a caveat. Well, first of all, it's a golden retriever, I believe. Or maybe it's not. I don't even remember. It doesn't matter. It's a very smart dog named Enzo. And it's just really fun to see this very touching story unfold through the eyes of and through the narration that is really simplistic. Because if you think about the way a dog views the world, or the way we think a dog views the world, it's not as complex and colored as the way that we look at things. And so getting that filter on the story is really interesting to me. I think the books that I am most interested in are my favorites because of the way the story is told, or through whatever lens the story is told. And it's less about what happens and more about the way it's told. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my first one. Do you want to throw one of yours in? Or you want me to do all three of mine?
Well, I was going to have you do all three of yours, but I wanted to make a comment about that because you said that you thought when you sat down to think about, okay, these are my favorite books. Why are they my favorite books? You said you thought it was a very worthy exercise to explore the why. Mm-hmm. I think that is something some of our authors should consider, especially when they're trying to figure out which genre they fit the best in.
Yeah.
What are your favorite books? What stories do you like telling, and what stories do you like reading, and how can you combine that in with your writing?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, so number 2, what's your next one?
Okay, so my second one is actually, it's a YA book by an author named, it's sitting behind me on my shelf, and for some reason the name is eluding me. So hang on one second. E. Lockhart. It's called Wires. Did you ever read this one? Why are you laughing?
Go ahead, you talk and then I'll talk.
You don't like this book?
You talk first.
I got it signed.
Nice. That's very nice.
But I liked it because of the unreliable narrator. I always enjoy an unreliable narrator, and it did have a little twist. It also, there were a couple parts of the twist that I wasn't believing because there's some dream elements. Mm-hmm. But what I enjoyed was both the language. Like at one point, the narrator is describing a boy that she likes, and he has dark skin. And she says, he doesn't say his, I don't remember exactly how it was phrased, but she doesn't say his skin was dark like coffee. She says his skin was dark coffee, like he is coffee. And I liked that assertive tone, especially contrasted with the unreliable narrator, because you kind of get the sense that she's not telling you what you need to know, but she tells it in a way that makes you want to listen. So what do you know about that book?
I've read that book, and I will tell you, I am not an unreliable narrator fan. I call them urns because URN, unreliable narrator. I read the whole book. I did think about the book for a long time. It did stay with me for a long time. At the time I was teaching high school, and I went into our high school librarian and went, I have to talk to somebody about this book.
Oh, that's funny.
It would not be on my top reading list because I like the journey.
Yeah. And
that was a book that when I got to the end of the journey, I was not pleased with where we ended up.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
To not give any spoilers. So it's not that I didn't enjoy the book. I enjoyed it up to the point where I figured out where we were going. And then I was like, now I have to finish it because I have to make sure I'm right.
Yeah.
Because I did see the twist coming at one point, and I was like, I have to make sure I'm right. And then I turned into what my husband refers to as rage reading.
Oh no.
that is where I keep reading, but I'm like, can you believe? And he's like, I will pay you to stop reading the book or just to stop talking to me about it. And so that's why I ended up in the library talking to the librarian. So it is extremely well written. It's an extremely well written book.
Well, so it's not your favorite story, but it's a good story. It stuck with you.
Yes, it definitely stuck with me. All
right, I'll take it. So I have a runner-up and my third.
Okay.
And the runner-up was going to be my third, but then as you were talking, I just remembered that I need to do a different one instead. So my runner-up is The Book Thief, Marcus Cusack. I think that there's Zucat. I can never remember the last name. And that's because it's also told by an interesting narrator. So far I've had a dog, I've had an unreliable narrator, and this one is told by death, which I think is
cool.
Fascinating. But I read it again with my kids, I don't know, about a year ago. And it was very dense for them. They're 10 and 12, and it's a World War II book. But Cusack is a literary writer. And so there was a lot of really complicated construction that the first time I read it, I was like, the the language. It's beautiful. The second time I read it, when I was a little more discerning, I guess, I thought some of it was just too much, just a little purpley.
Too wordy.
Yeah. And it didn't build the story. It was just words for the sake of pretty words sometimes. Although they did get a lot of German curse words out of that book that they still use quite often with each other, which I find.
It was educational.
Yes. But my real third book is by Kate Morton. It's called The Distant Hours. But I could easily stick in any one of her books as my third because she writes historical fiction with a mystery element. There's always a twist. And the way that she maintains the tension is by using two timelines. So she's got either a present day or a more recent past and then a distant past. And the two are winding together. And there's usually an old house involved. And I'm a sucker for old houses.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So those are my three.
Okay. So I didn't limit myself to three.
Oh, I thought you were supposed to. Well, I did four, really.
We were trying to, but again, I'm one of those people when somebody's like, hey, do you have a book recommendation? I'm like, sit down. Are you ready for this conversation?
3 hours.
So yes, let's talk about your best book. So some of mine are kind of similar and I'll go through them fast. Like I said, mine is about the journey. And so one of my absolute top favorite all-time books is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Now, the movie is not the book.
I like the movie.
The movie was okay if you can look at it as a completely separate entity from the book.
I hadn't read the book, so yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things of basically they kept like three things from the book, threw them into a blender, spun them around, and spit out a whole new story. So I loved the book. The book has this great journey of this young boy going through this. Basically, it's a post-apocalyptic world kind of, but there's a lot of 80s nostalgia in it and pop culture references. That is my absolute top favorite one. Okay. But again, it's about, for me, he's a memorable character, but it's also about, for me, of, okay, how did he survive in this world? How did he go on this journey? How did he win these challenges that he had to go through, which are completely different than the book, than the movie.
Okay.
And with that,
what's going on then?
To what?
I'll stop nodding like I understand what you're talking about.
Kind of in that same, I guess, connection or whatever is A Wrinkle in Time. Mm-hmm. That is absolute favorite since I was a child book that I reread as an adult and still liked it. Again, don't watch the movie, or watch the movie. Just don't connect the two.
Yeah.
And it's, again, for me, it's about the journey. It's about which A Wrinkle in Time has very memorable characters in it. And I read all the sequels to it and all that kind of thing. So
me too.
Again, it's that, how did they survive? What did they do? How did they make these decisions? And it's problem solving of what would I have done in that situation? According to discussions my husband and I have had recently, as much as I like to think I'm good at problem solving, in the post-apocalyptic world, I'm probably going to be one of the first ones to die. And we've just come to terms with that.
Okay.
So a more recent one that I really liked, and this I think you would like because of the narrator, is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. And it's by Stuart Tetron. I don't know how you say that.
Huh.
That is definitely an interesting narrator, and it's an interesting puzzle, and there's not a whole lot you can say about it to explain it, except for the character, the 7.5 deaths, which is really hard to say. That's true to what happens.
Okay.
So it's the fascinating type, but again, it was the journey for me. It was, how are they going to figure out how this is happening? How is this happening? And how they made their way out of it. It was one that I have to say, I wasn't thrilled with the ending. I enjoyed the journey. And then we got to the ending and I was kind of like, oh, well, I was expecting something more exciting than that. But it's still a very good book. the talking about characters and the journey, I have to say The Outsiders. Have to.
I'm embarrassed to say I've never read it. I've only seen the movie. This thing is moving. Do you see it like creeping?
Okay, so I'm sorry. We're going to have to stop this right now. You're going to have to go get a copy of The Outsiders and read it.
Okay.
No, it is. Since you haven't read it, then I can't really point it out to you. But the characters in it do take an amazing journey, but you remember the characters and their growth and their change and how they aren't the same person they are at the beginning. But it's a really, really good book. And then when we were talking about the twist, the two that I have to mention on the twist, which I will not give away the twist, but if you've read it and you want to talk to me about it, we can totally talk. One is the book The Dry by Jane Harper. It is set in Australia. It is during a drought, and it is kind of a murder mystery. There's some parts of it that I was like, okay, let's get the plot moving. Beautifully written. She writes very lyrically. The twist, we always talk about when you're talking about story structure, that you should take whatever is the worst thing this character thinks could happen and make it even worse.
Right.
And that is the most perfect example of that I've read of. I was totally expecting during the big showdown scene, I was totally expecting one thing to happen and something else happens that was amazingly worse. So that was a great example of a twist. And the other one I would suggest, just because I didn't limit myself, the other one I would suggest is a book called The Last Time I Lied.
Okay.
By Riley, I think it's pronounced Sager. It's Sager. That would be one you might like because you're not sure when you're going through it. And for several of that particular author's books, you're not sure if it's an unreliable narrator or not.
I would like that.
So
we should put we should put all of our recommendations in the notes when we're done, yes, so that if anyone wants to pick up any of these books, they can.
Well, and I'm interested for the people who watch and the people who are on our Evident page. I want to know what do you think makes a great story and what are your favorite books?
Yes, me too. That would be awesome. Well, and so now as a counterpoint, I think next week we have to talk about what makes a not great story. What can ruin a story, yes, for you?
Yes.
So we'll hit that.
We'll be sure not to list any specific books. We're not going to talk about anybody else's work.
Talking generalizations.
But I think there's definitely some good points that would help some of our authors to know what to avoid and to look at their own stories that they're writing and see, oh, wait, am I doing any of these things? Okay, I probably shouldn't.
Right. So, yeah. So this will kind of dovetail a little bit with, I think, something we'll talk about in more depth later, which is sort of, what not to do if you're writing your first book. Here's a couple things you might want to avoid.
Right.
But that will go more in depth. This will be story focused. And then what else are we talking about in the next couple weeks?
After we do the what makes a not great story, then we have to address the plotting versus pantsing.
Okay.
That's just it just has to be done. It's a requirement. So we'll attack that. And then after that, we've got a couple of topics set up, but we've talked about maybe having some guests on. So we're going to have to do some scheduling there. Okay.
Well, I'm excited. It was fun talking to you today. I love nothing more than talking about books. I wish that was my full-time job all the time.
Yes, I can. Like I said, if anybody ever asks me for a book recommendation, I'm like, are you really ready for this conversation?
Give me a block of time from 12 to 7 tomorrow.
Right. I will have a 4-page list complete with summaries and a star system of ranking.
Yeah, book reports were never a big drag for me because I was always like, oh, okay.
Let's talk about all about it. Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. It sounds like Penny is about to go insane. So I don't know if y'all can hear her doing her warm-up growl in the background.
Uh-oh. All right. Well, it's probably time for us to wrap up anyway. So thank you for joining us. If you're watching us later, feel free to leave comments. We do check them. And don't forget to put your favorite stories and your reasons for those. And we'll go ahead and list our books too, in case you want to check any of them out.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks so much. I'll see you later, Dawn.
I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye. It says ending.
Okay. It's like it still says live in the corner. Are we still live?
Yeah, I think we're still